Imagine this: a devoted wife, a seemingly perfect marriage, and a husband who swore he would love only her. For years, Emma believed she had built a life filled with trust and devotion. She had sacrificed, supported, and loved her husband, Ryan, through every high and low. But one day, something changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things. A shift in the way he spoke to her, how his phone was suddenly off limits, the late nights at work that stretched longer and longer. At first, Emma convinced herself it was nothing. After all, Ryan was a good man, wasn't he? But then came the whispers, the tiny cracks in the foundation of their life together. A scent on his shirt that wasn't hers. A receipt from a restaurant she had never been to. A look in his eyes that told her everything before he even said a word. That's when Emma knew her husband was hiding something. Most women might have confronted him, demanded answers, or even broken down in heartbreak. But Emma? She wasn't most women. She had given her all to this marriage, and betrayal wasn't something she would accept lightly. If Ryan thought he could play her for a fool, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Instead of tears, Emma chose strategy. Instead of an argument, she chose silence. And while Ryan continued living his double life, blissfully unaware, Emma was already planning her next move. Because this wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about justice. And when the truth finally came to light, Ryan wouldn't just regret his betrayal. He'd fear the consequences of underestimating the woman he vowed to love. But how far would Emma go to get her revenge? And what happens when the other woman becomes part of a game she never saw coming? Stay with me, because this story is just getting started. Emma had always been the kind of woman who noticed things, small details, that most people overlooked. It was part of what made her such a good wife. She remembered how Ryan liked his coffee, how he tapped his fingers against the table when he was deep in thought, how his voice softened when he was telling the truth and sharpened ever so slightly when he wasn't. She had spent years learning every inch of him, loving him in a way that was absolute, unwavering. That's why, when things started to shift, she felt it before she saw it. At first, it was just an odd text at strange hours, a new habit of turning his phone face down whenever she walked by. Then came the sudden interest in fashion, the cologne he had never worn before, the gym sessions that started lasting well past a reasonable workout. She had tried to brush it off, convincing herself she was being paranoid. But then, one evening, when Ryan came home late with an excuse so weak it nearly insulted her intelligence, Emma knew. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was certainty. But certainty wasn't proof, and Emma wasn't about to accuse her husband without knowing exactly what she was dealing with. So she did what any woman in her position would do. She watched, she listened, she waited, and soon enough, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. Ryan's lies were sloppy, filled with contradictions he hadn't thought through. One night, he was stuck in back-to-back meetings, but Emma later found a bar receipt in his jacket pocket. Another time, he claimed he was with an old college friend, but a quick glance at his social media told a different story. And then there was the biggest clue of all, a single crimson-colored lipstick stain on the collar of his white dress shirt. It wasn't hers. She hadn't worn red lipstick in years. Emma could have confronted him right then and there. She could have screamed, thrown that shirt in his face, demanded to know the name of the woman who thought she could walk into her marriage and take what wasn't hers. But Emma wasn't a woman ruled by emotions. She was calculating, patient. If Ryan thought he was getting away with this, she wanted him to keep thinking that. She needed time to figure out who he was seeing, how long it had been going on, and most importantly, why. Because that was the part that didn't make sense. Their marriage hadn't been perfect. No marriage ever was. But they had been happy, or so she thought. Ryan had never shown signs of wanting more, of being dissatisfied. And yet, here he was, sneaking around like some reckless teenager, risking everything they had built for what? A fling? A thrill? Or was there something else at play, something Emma hadn't considered? As she began piecing together the details, Emma started to see patterns. His absences lined up with certain days, certain places. A boutique hotel across town where he had supposedly never stayed. A restaurant reservation under a name that wasn't his but felt oddly familiar. And then there were the phone calls, the ones that ended the moment she walked into the room. The more she uncovered, the more she realized this wasn't just about infidelity. As she began piecing together the details, Emma started to see patterns. His absences lined up with certain days, certain places. A boutique hotel across town where he had supposedly never stayed. A restaurant reservation under a name that wasn't his but felt oddly familiar. And then there were the phone calls, the ones that ended the moment she walked into the room. The more she uncovered, the more she realized this wasn't just about infidelity. There was something deeper, something hidden in the shadows of her marriage that she hadn't yet uncovered. And if she wasn't careful, she might not like what she found. But she wasn't the only one watching. As Emma followed the clues, tracking Ryan's movements with careful precision, she started to feel something unsettling creeping at the edges of her mind, an uneasy sense that maybe she wasn't the only one playing detective. The other woman, whoever she was, wasn't just some random stranger. She was careful, deliberate. There were no social media trails, no obvious paper trails. It was almost as if she wanted to be found, but only on her own terms. That's when Emma realized this wasn't just a simple affair. This was a game, and she was about to find out just how dangerous it could be. Emma had always trusted her instincts, but now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if they were guiding her toward the truth or leading her straight into a trap. The deeper she dug, the more tangled everything became, like a web that had been spun long before she even realized she was caught in it. She had been careful, meticulous in gathering evidence, keeping a private folder of everything, photographs of Ryan's car parked outside unfamiliar places, screenshots of suspicious bank transactions, even a voice recording of a hushed phone call he took in the dead of night. But just when she felt like she was getting close to uncovering the truth, something happened that made her blood run cold. One evening, when she went to check the folder on her laptop, it was empty. Every file, every note she had collected gone. Deleted without a trace. Panic set in like a slow burning fire. Ryan couldn't have done it. He never touched her laptop, never even knew she was investigating him. So who did? Was someone watching her? Had she made a mistake, left her laptop open, her secrets exposed? She retraced her steps, but there was no logical explanation. Someone had erased everything, and it wasn't just a coincidence. It was a warning, and whoever did it wanted her to know they were one step ahead. Then came the phone call. An unknown number, a voice she didn't recognize. A woman, smooth and deliberate, as if she were enjoying every second of the conversation. "Stop looking," she said, her tone almost amused. "You won't like what you find." Then the line went dead. Emma sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, long after the call had ended. Was it her? The other woman? And if it was, how did she know? Emma had been careful, hadn't she? She had assumed this was just another affair, another story of a man who let temptation destroy the life he had built. But this was different. This was personal. The woman on the phone didn't sound like a mistress desperately clinging to stolen love. She sounded like someone who had a plan. That night, Emma barely slept. Every shadow in the house felt like it was watching her. Every creak in the floorboards made her heart pound. Ryan, oblivious as ever, slept soundly beside her, his breathing steady, peaceful. How could he sleep so easily while their entire marriage was unraveling? She wanted to shake him awake, demand answers, scream until he had no choice but to confess. But she didn't. Not yet. She needed to be sure of what she was dealing with. The next morning, she made a decision. If someone wanted her to stop digging, that only meant one thing: she was getting close. And if the evidence had been erased, she would have to find another way to get the truth. She started retracing her steps, revisiting the places Ryan had been, asking quiet, careful questions. That's when she met him. A bartender at the lounge Ryan had visited more than once. A man with tired eyes and a wary expression, as if he had seen too much and regretted all of it. At first, he brushed her off, uninterested in whatever she was asking. But then she mentioned Ryan's name, and something shifted in his face. A flicker of recognition, and something else: hesitation. "You're his wife, aren't you?" he finally asked, his voice low. Emma nodded, her pulse racing. The bartender exhaled sharply, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. Then, leaning in slightly, he murmured the words that made Emma's stomach drop. "You don't want to know the truth." Emma's mouth went dry. "Why not?" she whispered. But Emma wasn't the kind of woman to turn away, just because the truth was ugly. If anything, his warning only confirmed what she already suspected. This wasn't just about infidelity. Ryan wasn't just sneaking around with another woman. There was something deeper, something dangerous. And now she wasn't the only one who knew about it. As she drove home, her fingers gripped the steering wheel too tightly, her thoughts spiraling. She tried to piece everything together, but nothing fit, not yet. Who was the woman on the phone? How did she know Emma was looking? And more importantly, what was she trying to hide? But before she could make sense of any of it, her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Another unknown number. A lump formed in her throat as she hesitated, then reached for it. She wasn't sure she could take another cryptic warning, another chilling voice telling her to walk away. But when she answered, the voice on the other end wasn't a stranger. It was her sister, Claire. And she sounded terrified. "Emma," Claire's voice was breathless, frantic. I don't know what's going on, but something's wrong. Someone left a note on my car." Emma's stomach turned to ice. "What did it say?" she asked, already dreading the answer. A pause. Then, in a shaking whisper, Claire repeated the words that made Emma's blood run cold. "Stop looking. You won't like what you find." Emma pulled over to the side of the road, her pulse hammering in her ears. This wasn't just about her anymore. Claire had nothing to do with Ryan, nothing to do with any of this. So why was she being threatened too? Unless whoever was behind this thought she was involved. Or worse, unless Emma had unknowingly dragged her into something neither of them understood. Her mind raced, trying to find a connection. But before she could respond, Claire spoke again, her voice quieter this time, like she was afraid someone might be listening. "Emma, I think I know where the note came from." Emma gripped the phone tighter. "Where?" Claire hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Mom's house." The words sent a chill down Emma's spine. Their mother had passed away years ago, leaving behind a house neither of them had set foot in for a long time. It had been empty for months, collecting dust, a relic of a past they had both tried to move on from. But now somehow, it was connected to this. To Ryan. To the threats. To everything. Emma didn't believe in coincidences. Someone had gone to that house for a reason. Someone had left that note, knowing Claire would find it. And that meant only one thing: whatever was happening. It wasn't just about Ryan's affair. It was personal. It was buried in their past. And whoever was pulling the strings wasn't just watching Emma anymore. They were watching her family. The walls were closing in. The lies were stacking up. And for the first time since this all began, Emma started to wonder if she had already lost before she even knew what game she was playing. Emma barely remembered the drive home. Her thoughts tangled in a relentless loop, unraveling every conversation, every strange occurrence, every warning she had ignored. She kept telling herself that this had started with Ryan, with his lies, his betrayal. But that wasn't true, was it? This was bigger than an affair. the missing files on her laptop, the chilling phone call, the note left for Claire at their mother's house of all places. None of it made sense, and yet somehow it all had to be connected. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the weight of it all pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. But just as she reached for her bag, a flicker of movement caught her eye in the rearview mirror. A dark figure, standing at the edge of her property, half hidden behind a tree. Her breath hitched as she turned, her heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. But when she looked again, the figure was gone. Just shadows shifting in the night. At least, that's what she told herself as she forced her trembling hands to grip the door handle and step outside. She hurried inside, locking the door behind her, but the uneasy feeling didn't leave. It clung to her skin, crawling up her spine, making the walls of her own home feel unfamiliar, unsafe. She had never been the type to scare easily, but tonight was different. Tonight, she felt hunted. The silence in the house was thick, almost unnatural, and for the first time in her life, she hesitated before turning off the lights. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, making her jump. She let out a shaky breath, trying to steady herself, but when she saw the message on her screen, all the air was sucked from her lungs. No number, no name, just 2 words. Too late. Emma's fingers tightened around the phone as her mind spun. Too late for what? For stopping? For running? For the truth? A cold dread settled deep in her chest. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a promise. And then her phone rang. Unknown number. Again. Every instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to throw the damn thing across the room and pretend none of this was happening. But she couldn't. With a deep, unsteady breath, she pressed accept and lifted it to her ear. At first, silence. Then, a slow inhale. The sound of someone breathing, deliberate and measured, like they wanted her to know they were there. Then, a voice. A whisper. You should have stayed blind. Emma's stomach dropped. A sharp click. The call ended. Her hands were shaking now, her mind scrambling for answers, for logic, but there was none. She had been careful, methodical, but somehow, whoever was behind this was always a step ahead, watching, waiting. And now, they were telling her she was too late. A terrifying thought crept into her mind. Too late for what? For stopping? Or for saving someone? Her heart pounded as she dialed Claire's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. Emma's fear turned ice cold. Something was wrong. She grabbed her keys, her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her ears, as she bolted out the door. The night swallowed her whole as she sped toward Claire's house, her mind racing through every worst-case scenario, every possibility she didn't want to face. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about Ryan's betrayal anymore. This was something else entirely. And whatever it was, she wasn't just uncovering a secret. She was being dragged into something she might not survive. The roads were nearly empty as Emma sped through the dark, her headlights slicing through the thick, suffocating night. The sick feeling in her gut wouldn't go away, a gnawing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Claire always answered her calls, always. The silence on the other end of the line felt deliberate, like someone had made sure she wouldn't be able to pick up. Emma's fingers gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She couldn't shake the thought, looping in her head, over and over again. Too late. Too late for what? When she finally pulled into Claire's driveway, the house was dark. No lights, no sign of movement. Emma barely remembered shutting off the car before she was out of it, racing up the steps, banging on the front door. Claire, open up. No answer. She tried again, harder this time, but the door didn't budge. Panic surged through her, every nerve in her body screaming that something wasn't right. She reached under the flower pot on the porch, Claire's old hiding spot, for a spare key, but it was gone. Her stomach twisted. Claire had never moved it before. Emma stepped back, her mind spinning. And that's when she saw it. The back door, just barely open. A crack of darkness where there shouldn't have been one. Her breath caught. Every instinct told her to turn around, to call for help, to not step inside. But Claire was in there, and Emma wasn't leaving without her. She pushed the door open, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The air inside was thick, stale, like the house had been sitting untouched for weeks. She moved carefully, her footsteps light against the wooden floors, ears straining for any sound, any sign that Claire was still here. But the house was silent, too silent. Then something on the kitchen table. A single piece of paper, carefully placed. Emma swallowed hard as she stepped closer, her pulse hammering in her ears, as her eyes scanned the words written in smooth, deliberate handwriting. It was never about Ryan. Emma's breath caught. The room suddenly felt smaller, closing in on her. She reread the words, her mind struggling to process what they meant. Not about Ryan? Then who? Or what? And then a noise. A creak from upstairs. The sound of movement. Emma spun, her body tensing, her mind screaming that she wasn't alone. Someone was here. Watching. Waiting. She reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling as she tried to dial Claire again. The call went straight to voicemail. The walls felt like they were closing in, the silence thick and oppressive. Then, another sound, a slow, deliberate set of footsteps coming from the second floor. Not Claire's. Too heavy. Too controlled. Emma's chest tightened as she backed toward the front door, ready to run. But before she could take another step, her phone vibrated in her hand. A message. She didn't want to look, but she did. "You're looking in the wrong place." Her blood turned ice cold. She had come here to find Claire. But what if that was never the point? What if she had been led here? And then realization struck. Hard. The missing files. The phone calls. The erased evidence. The threats. It wasn't about Ryan. It never had been. It was about her. Emma's hands trembled as she lowered the phone, her mind spinning with the weight of the message. "You're looking in the wrong place." The words clawed at her, sinking into her bones like ice. She had thought she was chasing Ryan's secrets, uncovering the tangled mess of his infidelity. But now, the truth was shifting beneath her feet, warping into something unrecognizable. This wasn't about Ryan. It was about her. But why? What had she done? Or worse, what had she forgotten? A slow, deliberate creak sounded from the stairs. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the darkened hallway. Someone was up there, watching, waiting. She had to get out. Now, she took one step back toward the front door, but before she could move any further, her phone vibrated again. Another message. "If you leave now, you'll never know the truth." Her heart pounded. Whoever this was, they weren't just toying with her. They wanted her to choose. Walk away and stay safe. Or stay and finally understand what was really happening. But staying meant facing whoever was up there. Staying meant putting herself in the hands of someone who had been pulling the strings from the beginning. Her body screamed at her to run, but her mind refused to let go. If you leave now, you'll never know the truth. And wasn't that why she had started all of this? Hadn't she already risked everything, her safety, her marriage, her own sense of reality, just to get answers? Could she really stop now, knowing that whoever was behind this had already invaded her life, her family, her past? Her jaw clenched. No, she couldn't. Her legs felt like lead as she forced herself forward, one step at a time, toward the stairs. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. Every fiber of her being told her this was wrong, that she was walking straight into something she wasn't prepared for. But she had no choice. She had to know. As she reached the top of the stairs, The dim hallway stretched before her, the bedroom door shut, the silence pressing down like a heavy hand. And then movement, a shadow slipping behind the door at the end of the hall. Claire's room. Emma swallowed hard, her fingers curling into fists as she took a shaky breath and pushed forward. She reached the door, her pulse hammering so violently she thought it might choke her. She hesitated for only a moment before gripping the handle and shoving it open. The room was dark, but she could feel it. Someone was inside. The air was charged, electric with tension. Emma's breath came fast as her eyes darted around, adjusting to the dim light. The bed was unmade, blankets pulled back as if Claire had left in a hurry. The window was cracked open, the curtains shifting slightly from the night air. And then she saw it. A phone, sitting on the nightstand, still unlocked. A message open on the screen. Emma's stomach dropped as she stepped closer, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows across the walls. It was a message thread, between Claire and someone else. But it was the last message that made Emma's breath hitch in her throat. She's getting too close. It's time. Emma's hands went cold. The message had been sent only minutes ago, from Claire's phone. Her mind recoiled, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Claire had been the one receiving threats. Claire had been scared, hadn't she? But now, it looked like she had been a part of it all along. Emma barely had time to process before something cold and metallic pressed against the side of her neck. A sharp inhale. A voice, low and calm, whispering just behind her ear. You should have left when you had the chance. Emma froze. And in that moment, she knew she had just walked straight into the trap. Emma's entire body went rigid, her breath catching in her throat as the cold press of metal against her skin sent a sharp wave of terror through her. The voice behind her was calm, almost eerily so, as if they had already accepted what was about to happen, what she had walked straight into. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to move, to fight, to do something. But fear had locked her in place. Her mind raced, trying to piece together how she had gotten here, how she had missed the truth that had been lurking right in front of her. Then the pressure at her neck eased, and the person behind her let out a slow exhale. "Damn it, Emma," the voice muttered, almost like a sigh of disappointment. "I didn't want it to be like this." Her stomach dropped. That voice. She knew that voice. Claire. The air in the room shifted, the weight of betrayal hitting her so hard she nearly staggered. Emma turned slowly, her mind struggling to process the sight before her. Claire stood there, her expression unreadable, eyes dark with something Emma had never seen before, something cold. A gun dangled from her hand, not quite raised, but not lowered either, as if she was still deciding what to do. Emma's voice barely came out. "Claire, what is this?" For a moment, Claire said nothing. Then she let out a quiet, humorless laugh, shaking her head. "I told them you wouldn't stop," she murmured, more to herself than to Emma. "I warned them you'd keep digging." Emma's chest tightened. "Them?" Her voice broke on the word. "Claire, what the hell is going on?" Claire's expression flickered, something almost like regret flashing across her face before she shut it down. "You were never supposed to find out." She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. "God, Emma. You think this started with Ryan? That this was about him?" She scoffed. "Ryan was just the bait. The distraction. We needed you looking in the wrong direction." Emma felt the room tilt beneath her. "We?" Her mind was spinning, grasping at pieces that no longer fit together. This wasn't just Claire. There were others. Claire let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the gun. "You don't understand. You were never supposed to be part of this." Emma felt something crack inside her. "Part of what, Claire?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I've been chased, threatened, manipulated. I deserve to know." Claire hesitated. Just for a second. Then she tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You don't even remember, do you?" A sharp pulse of fear shot through Emma's chest. "Remember what?" Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Think, Emma. Think back. Before Ryan. Before everything. You and I, we weren't just sisters. We were involved." Emma's heartbeat thundered in her ears. No, that wasn't possible. She would remember something like that. Wouldn't she? "You were one of us," Claire said softly, "until you decided to walk away. But they don't just let people walk away, Emma." So we erased it. All of it. The words slammed into her like a freight train. She tried to breathe, but the air in the room was suddenly too thin, the walls too close. "You're lying." The denial came automatically, but deep down, something inside her twisted. A memory, just a flicker of something she couldn't quite grasp. A conversation in hushed voices. A cold, sterile room. The feeling of being watched. Claire watched her carefully, as if waiting for it to sink in. "You asked them to take it away. To make you forget. And for a while, it worked. You built a new life. Got married. Thought you were free." Her lips pressed together. "But then you started remembering little things, pieces slipping through the cracks. You didn't even realize what you were doing when you started digging into Ryan. But you weren't uncovering his secrets, Emma. You were uncovering your own." Emma's entire body went cold. She had been the target all along. She staggered back a step, her breath coming too fast. "Who are they, Claire?" she demanded, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Who did I work for?" Claire's gaze darkened. "People who don't forgive mistakes." The weight of her words settled like a stone in Emma's chest. "You were given a second chance," Claire continued. "A life outside of them. You weren't supposed to come back. But now you have. And they know." She paused. "Which means you only have two options." Claire's grip tightened on her wrist. "Listen to me," she rasped. "They won't stop. You need to disappear for real this time." Emma shook her head. "No, not until I end this." A flicker of something passed through Claire's gaze. Maybe fear. Maybe pride. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached into her pocket and pressed something into Emma's palm. "A flash drive. The real truth," Claire murmured. "It's all there. Names. Locations. Everything they've done." Emma swallowed hard, clutching it tightly. "And you?" Claire smiled faintly, but her eyes were already drifting shut. "Guess I'll finally find out if there's an afterlife." "No, Claire." But the rise and fall of her chest slowed, her body going limp. Emma's breath hitched. She wanted to scream, to break, to do anything to pull Claire back. But outside, in the distance, sirens wailed. Help was coming. But so were they. Emma forced herself up, the weight of the flash drive pressing against her palm. She didn't have time to grieve. Not yet. She ran. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. The rain had started again, soft and unrelenting, as Emma stood at the edge of the city, staring out at the endless road ahead. The world felt different now, heavier, like it had been stripped of the illusions she had once clung to. She had spent so long chasing the truth, unraveling the lies, and now that she finally had all of it, it sat in her pocket like a lead weight. The flash drive. The key to everything. It was still warm from the heat of her palm, as if it had absorbed every desperate heartbeat, every ounce of grief and fury that had carried her to this moment. Claire was gone. That truth hit the hardest. She had given Emma one last choice, one last chance to disappear, to slip back into the shadows and let the past consume itself. But Emma couldn't do that. Not now. Not after everything. Claire had fought for her, had given up everything to make sure she had this final weapon, this undeniable proof of what had been done to them. And Emma wasn't about to let that sacrifice mean nothing. She had spent the last 3 days running, moving from town to town, changing cars, switching identities, staying ahead of the people she knew were hunting her. They wouldn't stop. Claire had warned her. This wasn't just about secrets. It was about power, control, the kind of influence that made people disappear without a trace. The kind of darkness that swallowed the truth before it could ever be spoken. But Emma wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. And anger was a fire that refused to die. She had options now. She could go public, upload the files, send them to every major news outlet, let the whole world see the monster lurking beneath its polished surface. But she knew better than to think that exposing them would be that simple. People like them didn't just crumble under the weight of truth. They buried it, twisted it, made sure the ones speaking it were never heard from again. No, this wasn't something she could fight with headlines and courtrooms. She had to be smarter. The only way to win was from the inside. Emma exhaled, watching as her breath curled into the cold night air. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, unmarked phone, one she had stolen off Claire's body before she left. She hadn't dared to use it before, knowing every number inside was a potential death sentence. But now she was done running. She scrolled through the list of contacts, each name sending a fresh wave of unease through her. These weren't ordinary people. These were the ones who had been pulling the strings from the beginning, the ones who had decided who she would be, who had erased her past and tried to erase her future. And one name stood out above the rest. She pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, smooth and controlled. Not surprised, not rushed, as if they had been waiting for this call. I was wondering when you'd reach out. Emma's grip tightened around the phone. Her heart should have been racing, but instead, there was only a strange sense of calm, a quiet resolve that settled deep into her bones. I'm ready to come back, she said. Silence stretched for a beat too long. Then a quiet chuckle, laced with something unreadable. Are you now? Emma glanced down at the flash drive in her other hand, feeling its weight, the pulse of everything it contained. Yes. Her voice didn't waver. But this time, I make the rules. The chuckle deepened, turning into something closer to approval. Interesting. Let's talk. The line went dead. Emma slipped the phone back into her pocket, closing her fingers around the flash drive one last time, before tucking it away. She turned, stepping off the curb and walking into the night, disappearing into the city's heartbeat.